So I wanted to talk about just a couple of adjustments on the Juki LU-1508. There's a couple different sub-variants of that. This is the 1508N. There's also an NH that can take a 190 system needle, but this one takes a real typical 135/17 needle, or if you're using a leather point, it uses a 135/16. So this is the N variant, and before they came out with that, they just called it the 1508. And with that model update, there was some improvements to the oiling system and this quick release access panel. So this will come shipped with a screw in there, but you don't need to leave that in there simply because it's got a magnetic catch now. So it's really easy just to flip that back and add oil to all the wicks in there. And I think that helps you lubricate it a little less frequently. So it's kind of a nice convenience thing. There's still a few manual oiling points that you'll hit. This one's marked in red. This one on top, pay particular attention to. That's actually an oil well, so you can put more than just a few drops in that one. It's got this little shorty reverse paddle that actually takes less downward pressure than my LU-563, and stitch length is quite large too. It goes up to about 9 or 10 millimeters, so that's a nice benefit if you like that decorative top stitch. Of course, one of the main benefits on this machine that Juki touts is their double tension assembly. So that'll let you use thicker top threads at least. So, you know, it's advertised to handle 138 top and bottom, but you can go up to 207 or higher on the upper thread at least. And spreading the tension out over 2 sets of discs just decreases the likelihood that you'll crush or damage the thread. Of course, there's lots of attachments available for this machine. One I particularly like is this drop-down edge guide. That little roller wheel helps you follow an edge quite accurately, and when you flip it up, it's not really in your way. It's got a detachable knee lift on it. Kind of reminds me of the old FAF 1245 system, but that seems to work really well. Just remember that you have to pull off that knee lift in order to tip the machine head back. And the knee lift on the 1508 is just berserk. I mean, there's a 3/4 inch spacer and there's room to spare, so probably 13/16 or better when operated by the knee lift. A little bit less now when you operate it by hand, but the one you'll commonly use is the integrated knee lift, so it's nice to be able to get a lot of uncompressed material under those presser feet. This one has kind of a basic analog servo motor on it with a 75mm pulley, and I want it to sew a little bit more slowly, so I think I'm going to swap it out for a digital servo. Today I had a Kindine cowboy motor come into the shop, so I think I'll swap it out for that and see what kind of improvements I can get on the performance. And the large hand wheel already has the hub for the needle position sensor pre-installed, so that should be an easy assembly once I get a minute or two to add that motor. A couple of adjustments I want to make you aware of here. 2 screws control the downward pressure on the presser feet. This large column is for the outer presser foot. This smaller screw is for the inner presser foot. Now that inner one is a very small spring, so while you can make adjustments there, it doesn't have a large effect on the resistance you feel as you raise and lower the presser foot. But the one that really makes a difference is this one. For instance, if your machine came with this turned almost all the way down, you'll have an enormous amount of downward pressure, and it can actually mark up leather or delicate material. So what I always like to do is back that out almost all the way. You can always tighten it up if you need more downward pressure for good control of your material, but the main thing is to not mark up your leather, and the best way to do it is just back that screw out. Maybe if we're lucky you can see the springs that affects. The real light gauge spring is below that screw, and the real heavy duty spring is below that threaded column. Under the machine there's a couple of pans, and this one actually looks like it might be a drip catch pan, but in actuality that's an oil bath, so you want to fill that with sewing machine oil about 1 millimeter above the sponge that's in there. Below that there's a black drip catch pan that has welded seams, really nice construction, so you won't have any trouble using this machine indoor even if you're on finished floors. And it's a Juki, so it's built to last. The other adjustment on this that sometimes gets missed is a steppage adjustment for the presser feet. Now normally this will be hanging out behind the back of a walking foot, but on this one it's actually internal. So let me get a light on that and see if we can visualize what's going on. This would normally be a wing nut, and it just controls how high the feet step. But on this one it's either 8 or 10. I'll have to get a wrench on that. And just raise it up if you want the maximum steppage, or drop this linkage down if you want it to have a lower steppage as you sew. Now it's actually a 9 millimeter, so we'll just loosen that up and make that adjustment. down to the bottom for minimal steppage, or all the way up at the top for maximum steppage. For everyday projects, you'll have that on the middle notch or right in the middle of the range. And that's what it looks like on minimum steppage. And this is with it adjusted for maximum steppage. And that's actually the linkage that you're lubricating when you drop your oil spout down into that little red dot on top of the machine. So it's kind of handy that you don't have to remove that panel every time you oil it. And that's it for those basic adjustments, but I think if you know about the downward pressure on your feet and the steppage adjustment, it just gives you a lot more flexibility when you're working on projects. For balancing your tension, just make sure that the stitch looks good top and bottom, and if there's any loose threads on the bottom, you might want to increase your upper tension. And since the 1508 uses a double upper thread tension assembly, you'll want to adjust both those knobs each time you make a change. So if you get to know those two adjustments on your walking foot, it'll make setting your machine up a little bit easier, and they're just really helpful adjustments to know in your workroom. So if you're thinking about grabbing a walking foot sewing machine, the 1508 is one to consider. It's got that semi-automatic lubrication, some improvements they've made with that magnetic latch on it, and kind of a rectangular feed with the feed dog. So it's a great triple feed walking foot machine. A lot of the way that it acts just depends on what motor you have on it, but I'm going to be setting this up with a Kindine Cowboy motor, so stay tuned for those upgrades and updates on that. But in the meantime, if you want to drop down to the description box, you'll find links to this machine and some of my favorite accessories.